Hey, hi! Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, TIFF's Senior International Programmer for Canada, and this is the other thing I do. The festival is over, and you can tell because my voice is wrecked, but my guest this week is RJ Daniel Hanna, a writer, director, and editor whose credits include Miss Virginia and Hard Miles. His latest feature is kind of a departure for him. It's Succubus, starring Brendan Bradley, Rachel Cook, and Olivia Applegate in a supernatural story of paranormal seduction, ordinary temptation, and techno-paganism, kind of. It's released on DVD and digital by Shout Studios next Tuesday, September 24th, and you should check it out. Daniel picked A Clockwork Orange, Stanley Kubrick's 1971 social satire, or maybe a horror movie, about a violent young man named Alex DeLarge who's forced to submit to psychological reconditioning by the British government and released into a world from which he now has no defense. Based on the novel by Anthony Burgess and starring Malcolm McDowell in the role that defined him for generations of moviegoers, it's no exaggeration to say this film was a watershed moment in cinema, to the point that half a century later, we're still trying to understand how it does what it does to us. Obviously, you're gonna want to be familiar with the film before you listen to this episode. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I mean, for me, in terms of this being, I guess, kind of a pivotal movie or early movie that kind of shaped me as someone who was interested in filmmaking beyond just being a casual viewer, I probably saw it at like 16, and I was always looking for movies that would kind of knock me over, that would shock me and kind of sear my brain, because it was such a fascinating feeling of being kind of overwhelmed by a work. And this movie definitely does that. It was so different than what I expected. I don't know what I expected, but just the mixture of, the intensity of the violence and Alex's attitudes toward the world, combined with the humor, this sort of broad humor, and almost like sometimes it feels like a musical almost, and even has kind of a musical number in there, and just these things that were all mixing together and playing off each other just kind of had a profound impact on me. And I feel like it's not my favorite Kubrick movie, but I feel like it's the most like Kubrick movie. Like it's sort of all of the things that he deals with are packed in there and kind of bursting out of it, and it just really kickstarted something in me where I felt like I could understand how like see a filmmaker's point of view and vision so clearly in a film, and make me kind of understand how much a director can shape a movie.
That's actually a really comprehensive take. I was going to say, you said that you saw it probably too young. I'm pretty sure everyone sees Clockwork Orange too young. Right? Like, no matter what their circumstance, no matter, since, I would say, 1975, everybody who sees it, who comes to it, is coming to it a little bit too quickly. I definitely saw it when I was too young to fully understand it, and that was back on, that would have been the Laserdisc days, probably even before that. I remember seeing it in the theater because it was a huge deal that these prints were available briefly, and there was a rep screening of that, and what was the other one? It might have been Barry Lyndon. And it was nothing at all like I expected, and also exactly what it was supposed to be. It's like the tonal control of it is remarkable. And that was my introduction, I think, into how to read a film in a lot of ways, to be able to understand what you can do with the idea of satire that doesn't flinch from its... Because I had seen Dr. Strangelove, and it's pretty broad. I mean, it's a PG-13 comedy with a lot of very, very silly things in it that's about a grim and serious subject. But then this is satire. This is what that feels like. This is what teeth feel like. And the combination of Burgess's book and Kubrick's take on it, and the incredible presence of Malcolm McDowell, it took me another 15 years, I would think, like until I was in my 30s, to really understand how good it is. Because it's not like any other experience of Kubrick's films that I've had, where it's just, what is it, the Ludovico treatment? That is its own thing. It just steamrolls you into submission in the first 20 minutes and then proceeds to open up its box of ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Teeth is a great way to put it. And weirdly, I think it is closest to Doctor Strangelove than any of his other works, which is not what I think you'd initially think, because it's such a hard R-rated movie, you know, compared to the silliness of Doctor Strangelove. And but it is kind of forcing you to feel, like, kind of acknowledge the comedy and feel the, kind of go along with it and be kind of conditioned into watching it and accepting like, we're going to have this broad humor with, like, the, you know, the prison guard or these things, like, you know, there are things that feel like a Monty Python routine amidst this really, really dark and challenging world. And I think that's, you know, you kind of have mentioned, I think its reputation gets diminished a little bit because people maybe watch it for the wrong reasons or judge it on the wrong criteria, and it kind of becomes maybe like a Fight Club or something where there's a lot of great things happening beneath the surface of the movie, but it kind of gets pigeonholed into being this one type of thing for this one kind of fan. And I guess that's the thing that makes me come back to it, you know, every, I don't know, 5 years or 10 years, because there's so much more in it, and it's kind of fascinating to see how it will unfold a different way every time you see it, just based on how visceral of an experience you have, whether you have a more intellectual experience or whether you kind of forget how shocking it is and then get shocked again and have to recover from that.
Yeah, it's the Fight Club comparison is really astute, I think, too, because it is the kind of movie that is about the sort of people it doesn't want to come and see it, but they end up finding it anyway because they see themselves represented, or they think they see themselves represented. I mean, yes, absolutely. It's it was Truffaut's thing about an anti-war film being impossible, because ultimately all film is making something glorified or more interesting or larger than life. I remember being genuinely stunned when The Simpsons had the joke of Bart dressing up as a Droog for Halloween. And I think that was their first Halloween episode. This would have been like 89 or 90. And that's a child. And then, of course, you get it. The whole point of it is that he doesn't know what it means. But they have him quote the dialogue a little bit, just enough. I mean, obviously, that's the Harvard writers having fun with the idea of it. But the cultural penetration is ultimately really disturbing, because, you know, A Clockwork Orange is a meaningless term, which then became representative of the novel and the film to also explain ultraviolence. And when you have someone as charismatic as McDowell, who Kubrick said he cast him because he radiated intelligence and would pull you into this dead-eyed monster, Alex DeLarge is not a good person. He's never a good person. Even at the end, he's not a good, like, even in the middle, he's not a good person. But he is self-aware in a way that makes for a genuinely moving and also stomach-turning evolution of that character, where we are watching an animal be punished for something that it can't stop itself from doing. It just happens to be a human being. And the punishment is ostensibly correct, right? I mean, he is a villain. He is a brutal a rapist and a thief and a thug, and probably kills a whole bunch of people that we don't see before we even meet him, just out of a lack of care, a lack of, like, concern. I don't know that he's a sociopath, though, because it's demonstrated over and over again that he's absolutely a product of his environment. And so by forcing us to identify with him simply because it's his story, Kubrick just sets us in the chair. Like, he plants us down and makes us suffer alongside of him after we've watched him make people suffer for, a full 45 minutes to an hour before the big turn comes. It is so complex narratively and impossible to break down. I have tried over and over again to figure out what it is that it's doing and how it's doing it. And I think the only thing I can conclude is that there's something about Kubrick's proscenium framing that makes it feel like a trap for us. Like, we're seeing it. That's the 50 millimeter lens, right? Like the genius of shooting things through the human eye is that you are in the room and then you can't leave.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, I think he he pushes you past your breaking point in terms of, in so many ways. I mean, one of them I think is shot length. Like, you kind of get the idea, when it first cuts to, like, the scene of Billy Boy and his other droogs or whatever, and what they're getting at. And it's like, you have the classical music and you have this sort of orchestrated scene of violence, and you sort of think, okay, I get it, right away. I get what's happening, but then it keeps going and keeps going and keeps going to a point where you're kind of, it goes past the point of, okay, I get what you're doing, and into like, okay, well, I don't know how to get out of this anymore, and how long am I going to be forced to sit here and deal with it? And I think that kind of makes you live in the room, like you're saying. And in a similar way, you're just over and over, Alex's voiceover, refers to himself as your humble friend and narrator and things like that. And at first you're like, well, no, you're a psychopath, you're not my friend. And then it's just over and over. And the more it puts you in his headspace and forces you to kind of see his sort of wallow in his punishment and sadness, as much as you kind of want to see him suffer for all the things he's done, you're just kind of forced with so many things, from the snake, his pet dying, like every little tool that you could possibly use to say, well, you weren't on his side before. How about this? How about this? How about this? Until you almost have no choice but to feel a little bit sorry for him despite everything. And I mean, that experience it's just completely unique to have in 2 hours and 10 minutes or whatever, to go from someone who you just want to get away from the first moment when he's looking, into camera, and then somewhere 2/3 the way through, you're like, well, this is the vessel that I'm traveling with on this journey, and it kind of is like being him in a way. He is who he is, and that's the only perspective he has on the world, and at a certain point we're tied to that. It's just like, I mean, it's an incredible feat.
The other thing about it that never gets any credit is it was received as science fiction. It was received as a future dystopia, but there's almost nothing in it that isn't present day. It's simply now. Like, it is, other than maybe the aesthetic of a couple of houses. The cars are conventional, the clothes are a little stylized and ridiculous, but again, it's fashion. That could be happening. The sense that, oh no, what kind of future is this? I remember reading reviews and seeing people lamenting that this is a cautionary tale. It's like, I think the point is this is right now. And 10 years later, in the real world, we have, Alan Clark's movies, and they're a little less fantastical in their ideas of, some sort of operant conditioning that might work on a thug. But other than that, Scum is basically the same as this movie. It's probably the natural outgrowth of the success of Clockwork Orange, and that's the ironic thing, of course, because in the UK, Clockwork Orange was withdrawn almost immediately by Kubrick after it inspired some real world violence, and it became like a mythological terror. It was a story you told to scare children at the movie theaters, or directors to make them behave. And so in the UK, it just achieved this level of infamy, and people would imagine the horrors from reading the book and the depictions. And then when it finally got re-released and recertified, it was almost disappointing to some because it wasn't as awful as they imagined. But that's not the point of the film. It was never about showing you awfulness. It's about making you feel awful.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of like a test in a way, like the treatment. He says, like, I used to always feel really, I used to feel great doing all this stuff or watching this stuff, and now I feel terrible watching these horrors on screen. And yeah, there was a whole, there's gonna be a whole group of people who that is what the movie does. Is maybe they like feeling awful watching it, or they just are like, wow, I've never seen this before. It's so intense. It's so shocking. I get a thrill out of that. And if you build that up too much or so much, and then 10 years go by, everything becomes sort of just
normalized,
kind of tepid by comparison. Yeah.
Yeah, I have some notes here on some of the reviews at the time. Pauline Kael called it pornographic. Roger Ebert said it was an ideological mess. But that's more about American Puritanism, I think, refusing to get through the veneer. The veneer of the film is fascinating. There's the constant proclamations of morality and how did your parents fail you, and oh, Alex, you poor boy. Everybody's constantly. And again, it comes back to this, like an abused dog. He's almost like a rescue animal in a horrible way. He's treated with absolute condescension by everybody who wants to help him, and then is left absolutely powerless. Maybe a cat having its claws taken out is a better analogy, but there is so little humanity shown to him, despite the protestations that everyone is doing their best and treating him like a person, which I find really awful and ugly. On my most recent viewing, it was just like, oh yeah, no, not a single person cares about this boy. And he is. I mean, Malcolm McDowell now in our minds is this grand adult figure. I've met him a couple of times and he is a goddamn delight. He is probably the single best raconteur I have ever encountered. Like he'll just pull a string and tell you a 10-minute story. And there is a great story he told me about Kubrick keeping Warner's executives at bay while making the movie. And I'll get to that later if there's time. But it's just, again, it's a bunch of geniuses celebrating how smart they are to put something over on the suits. But because McDowell is so charismatic and so interesting, even when he's in like cowering and abject horror, you want to root for him. I think that's the key of the casting. We see Alex as human, even though we shouldn't, and no one else does.
Yeah, he's like the most, I mean, like you said, I think it's probably the most charismatic performance like maybe ever put, on screen. It's like maybe him and Jack Nicholson would maybe be the only person who could have given him a little bit of a run for the money. But he's kind of an anti Patrick Bateman or something, like someone who is so inhuman, Yeah. And the problem with Alex is he's so, I mean, the outcome of it, the way he puts it forth, but he just is so kind of delightfully human and takes so much pleasure in the world, as horrible as his tastes are, And I think the thing with that too is there's almost he kind of makes the case for that idea of like, I guess everyone having something redeeming in him, like as irredeemable as he is, you can at least go, well, he does seem smart, like he's clearly intelligent, and he clearly has things that he loves, like he loves Beethoven, and he loves all these other kind of strange things that you wouldn't expect from him, and there's always a little bit something there that it brings you back to him, and makes you just want to watch him, even if you want to look away at what he's doing. And I think like it's funny that he didn't. I know he played a similar part before. I'm forgetting the name of the movie now. The movie about the high school.
Oh, the boarding school film.
Yeah, but he kind of didn't really ever go back to a role like this, as far as I'm aware of.
He was used by a lot of filmmakers as villains almost immediately, just because that's how they saw him. But yeah, the humanity of Alex is something that's missing from, something like Schrader's Cat People or any of the dozens of movies he would make over the next decade where he did just play a sneering bad guy. I'm thinking of something like, he got genre work constantly as a result of this, as you would expect. But I'm thinking of something like Time After Time, which is just his performance as H.G. Wells is tender and gentle and soft and brainy. And the joke of the film, of course, is that he's the hero in a movie about Jack the Ripper, which is, of course, more or less how everyone sees Alex. And that was just, 6 or 7 years later? Maybe? It was released in 79, shot in 78. So yeah, it was the same decade anyway. But he is so good at, and again, people are going to be listening to this and thinking, well, you've already called him a rapist and a murderer, and he is absolutely a monster, Alex is. But McDowell is so good at showing us the flickers of personhood of sentience underneath this. And of course the narration also, as you said, plugs us in right away to the fact that he has an inner life. He's boasting, which is horrible, but it's also entirely possible that we're listening to someone's intake interview. Like there's never a context provided for the voiceover. It's just magic. It's obviously it's a version of the novel's narration, first person narration, but it's this conflict that's constantly there about why am I watching him? It's because I feel for him somehow. And then you ask yourself why you feel for him, and then you ask yourself what the world is, and then you get a little nauseous for a bit. And it's just, it really is maybe the most controlled thing Kubrick ever made, which is really saying something. And I mean, I love his work. We haven't mentioned Lolita yet in terms of satire, because I don't know that he really got that one. I don't think that his sense of humor is lining up with what Nabokov wanted to do in that book. And again, when you cast Peter Sellers as Quilty, you sort of further shift the sympathies of the audience towards Humbert. And you're not supposed to, like, the whole point of the book is that you're not supposed to do that. And I don't know that the movie ever gets there. It almost made me wonder if he made this as a way to demonstrate that he could, in fact, handle complex satire.
That's kind of just what I was going to say. Is it feels like this movie kind of corrects the sort of shallow. Lolita's the one movie of his I don't really like. Mm-hmm. Like, I just feel like it's a bit of a shallow take on the book, and yeah, he sort of. It was like he said, "Oh, it's kind of funny. Like the book's kind of funny. This narrator is kind of funny." You know, in this dark way, I'll make a movie that's funny, but it's not the same kind of dark humor. Humor is kind of the wrong word, but just the sort of disparity between what's happening and how it's being presented. And that is exactly what he nails in A Clockwork Orange, you know, maybe better than anyone's ever accomplished something like that. So I think that's a pretty good take. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's weird that might have been driven by insecurity in his own abilities. You know, do people not get this? I must explain it to them. But it results in an undeniable triumph over morality, really, over all of it. All the things that are supposed to hang you up in Lolita are the strengths of A Clockwork Orange. The idea that he is forcing us to identify with someone who we would cross the street to avoid in real life, and maybe even also put the book down. Like, I love the fact that he does it with Barry Lyndon too, and The Shining. Kubrick was making a series of movies about trapping us in space with characters and using the fact that we've paid for a movie ticket and we have a window of time to lock us in with these people. You know, you can put a book down, you can take I guess the VCR analogy wouldn't, I was going to say you can take a tape out of the machine, but the VCR analogy wouldn't have even been available in 1971. Mm-hmm. This is it. You're here, I have you, and I'm going to make you feel this. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, the flip side of it on the morality thing is interesting too, because at the same time, the treatment, you know, just on like in a broad strokes way, you know, obviously like I find like it's totally dystopian, you know, authoritarian, all of these things, and it kind of like reject the idea of it, except Alex is also so awful, like our protagonist is so awful that you almost want to make an exception in his case for this. It's like, I know this treatment is wrong, but I've actually been with this guy for the last, you know, in his life 2 years or whatever it is, and I kind of know how irredeemable he is, and maybe there is no other way to keep this guy under control. And the writer character kind of has that experience where first he wants to treat him as a, you know, like a symbol of this poor boy who's been put through this awful treatment, and he wants to help him, he wants to use him, and then once he realizes that he's the one that actually inflicted the violence on him and his wife, that all turns, and then all he really wants is punishment and revenge. And it's just kind of, you know, even within, again, such like a broad take on these things, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of different places you can go. Like, it's not as I think didactic as it's sometimes criticized for being, because there really is a justifiable other side to almost, you know, every angle of the movie.
Hey, it's Norm interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. This week, I'll be writing about Criterion's beautiful 4K release of Andrew Haight's All of Us Strangers and the Arrow special edition of David Twohy's The Chronicles of Riddick. And there's plenty more to come. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. It's not playing games with us. The script fully accepts that we see everything in front of us. There are no tricks. We recognize Mr. Alexander long before Alex does, and that scene, God, that shot of him putting everything together is horrifying, in an objective way. That's the thing I almost don't like looking at it, and it was obviously very famously quoted as a season finale moment in Breaking Bad, and you heard people saying, "Oh, that's a really cool shot." It's like, no, you have no idea how disturbing that is. That is just, it's so unpleasant and unrelenting, and it feels like the thing I always connected to is the shot of Hal watching wordlessly just before the intermission in 2001, because you are left alone with catharsis that hasn't happened yet. But everything that happens next is because of this one moment. And I don't know that anybody was as good as making you feel that in a movie. Those two moments there could have easily been an intermission at that point in A Clockwork Orange, and I think a lot of people might not have come back. You could also end the movie there. Because everything else that happens is guaranteed, almost.
Right.
But by not flinching and holding it, and by letting Patrick McGee play that as long as he does, and just not breathe through it, it's excruciating. It's one of the most unsettling things I've ever seen before or since. And it's just a person's face. It's just a face from a low angle. That's all it is. And it has more impact than any other shot in this incredibly violent, brutal movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that. So much of it, that shot I remember. I mean, I again, the first time I saw it, I remember, because it's like that shot represents so many things happening, in the movie. Like you said, it's a turning point. And you're waiting, is he going to realize? And whatever, what you expect is for him to go maybe like, oh, that's him, let me make a phone call or something like that, or be angry. But you've gone so far past this where he's like having a seizure or something like that, and just completely back in this hell that he had lived in, and you get all of that from the shot. And I think part of one of the things I thought about rewatching it this time was, even though it's a very violent movie, you kind of you don't see that much of it, really. Like, it's all build up. It's all the kind of the invasion on our space of an audience, like him invading people's homes. It's just disturbing imagery to think about, But then also he'll put you so close to a horrifying image of a person's face. Like Mr. Alexander, the writer, or even early on, I remember when he walks into the tunnel and the homeless man's there, it's that cut to his profile, and his eye, doesn't seem like it's looking at anything, and it's just so inhuman. And I'd never expected, I remember just being shocked by that cut the first time I saw it, because I didn't think I would have to get that close to him again so soon and see such an inhumanity there in someone's close-up, whereas usually, obviously a close-up is meant to bring you in as close as possible to somebody's inner life and humanity, and then when you see him, there's just nothing there but this kind of cold, calculating, evil. And just the power of that, of making us feel all these things while showing, there's very little blood. The first time we see blood is Alex's, when he's been beaten by the cops, which I think is very interesting too, from a perspective of trying to put us on his side. We don't see the woman that he kills. We just see the flashes of the paintings, which are its own kind of shocking moment, but it's very different from something like, you know, like Irreversible, which is so much like you're gonna see things for real, and you're gonna have to live with that. And I just find like what's happening in this so much more upsetting actually than anything like that.
Yeah, there's that. I mean, the Singing in the Rain sequence, which takes place in basically a master shot, is upsetting because it won't cut away. We never get closer, but we don't have to. We're seeing everything. Again, it's as though you're seated in the room. You're down there in the conversation pit watching this happen, and the fact that it will not stop has its own kind of power. And I've never did ask. I always kind of wanted to, but it feels like such a cliched question to ask someone about how many takes you go through for something like this. But at both times I've spoken to McDowell, I've really wanted to, but it feels like that's something he's been asked 100 times before, and you don't want to derail him with something he's heard. You want to just talk about new stuff.
Sure.
And I can only imagine that 50 odd years ago, shooting a scene like that was not nearly as safe as it used to be. I mean, obviously you're working with stunt people and everybody knows what's going on, but there are people having, like their clothes are being cut off with scissors right there on camera, and it's a long shot, and hopefully that was pre-scored and the scissors were blunted, but I doubt it. I mean, I expect that everyone in this is committed and doing their best to keep each other safe, but beyond that, the protocols just wouldn't have existed, I don't think. And, Shelley Duvall subsequently talked about her scenes in The Shining and said that Kubrick was incredibly empathetic and careful and made sure she was comfortable and safe. But you're still seeing someone go through hell 75 times by the time we see it. It's something I don't know. I mean, you've directed some fairly intense moments. How many takes do you, and I suppose you're working at a budget that forces you to be faster, but how many takes do you feel is enough for something like that? When is it just torture?
Yeah, I mean, I think when things are really intense like that, you are really hoping you get through it in a few, because you're asking people to do a lot, especially if they have to do something really physical. There's sometimes only so many times people can do it, and even just stuff like being in a harness, we had some things in a harness where our character's like lifted up and suspended, like they have to use, he's got to use his core muscles, he's got to do this stuff. There's a physical limitation on it, and in this movie, in these wide shots, they are kicking and hitting, and I'm sure they're padded and things like that, but it's still very physical, and it has to look like they're not pulling their punches too much. So at the same time, I mean, I was thinking this time, how many times would it take to get it really looking right? Because it's not just that he will like kick or hit someone. It's also how he lands so that he's facing camera, So it's sort of like you could see it being like, well, we have to do it again because we don't really see you in this profile, especially with this nose fake. Like there's a lot of that, like the drowning scene when they've got him under there, and I think I read they had a snorkel or something, but it's still this like horrible muddy water, and they're holding him under and they're hitting him with fake batons. Maybe once you can see they bend, but these are still big rubber things that they're hitting him with, and when they pull him out, he turns towards camera, and you can just imagine doing that whole take underwater for a minute, and then because he turns away, you can't tell that it's actually Malcolm McDowell, and it could look like a stunt person, in a wide shot like that. And so I bet they did a lot of takes especially knowing how he worked, right? Yeah. And that would be tough. And for all he inflicts, Malcolm McDowell, I think, has the most. I mean, he gets it as much as he gives it. I think he has such a heart, and then as an actor who's not a psychopath, presumably he has to actually do this stuff, which is also hard, and then he has to have all of this other violence inflicted on him. It's a really insanely demanding role. Just every day seemed like it was probably a tough day of shooting. Yeah, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the Ludovico sequence alone, right? Like you're in a chair with your eyes forced open, He did scratch a cornea. The eye drops that are being dropped in are an actual physician doing the work because that's a medical necessity. And for whatever take we see, he was in that chair for hours. It's inconceivable to me that he wouldn't have completely lost his mind.
Yeah. He's so committed. He's moving his eyes around. He's trying to struggle. I mean, he's faking it, but it's not like he's trying to protect his physical self. He's throwing himself fully into the role, even in those situations.
Yeah, it's even more remarkable to me that at the time some people were just discarding the film because it wasn't what they thought it would be or should be, and it was just exploitation. I mean, every frame of this thing is composed with the exacting exactly the right intensity, and the framing is such that you can't get away from it, and it is one of the most, despite the fact that it does take care to avoid showing you real brutality that often, it is one of the most assaultive movies I've ever seen. And subsequently, things like Irreversible just make me think, yeah, I know, but none of this is real. And by putting it all in front of me, you are not allowing my brain to fill in the horror. Like I'm being shown something that looks like it was awful to make. It looks like nobody's having a good time and the actors are not enjoying themselves, and this is all very awful. But I don't know that it sensitizes the audience to the characters the way that something like this does. And that's a constant battle, I'm sure, in genre nowadays. Like, how do you get people to invest in someone who's going to be brutalized or die horribly depending on the needs of the plot? And more often than not, I think people fall on the wrong side of that equation. But over and over again, the more time we have to spend with people, that seems to me to be the best way to connect with them. If you have a talented filmmaker and talented actors, you can have someone sitting at a table for an hour and still make me care. But yeah, the emotional always beats the graphic for me. If I care about the person who is suffering, then the suffering doesn't have to be explicit. You can have it out of frame. And if the actor's gifted enough, I will feel it.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think, like, something that I think Kubrick always engaged in is, that I thought was really interesting, is just POV, just the way he uses point of view, both literally in the shots and also and just kind of figuratively in whose perspective we're in, and how we fill in those gaps is really important. Where, like, this movie, I was thinking, kind of trying to think specifically, like, we're so much in Alex's point of view, in the whole movie. That's probably why we're shielded from some of the most violent stuff, because it doesn't affect him, too. And it is more shocking to imagine it, I think. But also, he kind of plays with... he never actually shows us, like, Alex's point of view until he's a victim. Like, we never see... We see other people's. We see the writers, when he's on the ground and Alex comes in and, tells him "Vidi well" or whatever as things are about to go down. And... that's being trapped, like we've talked about, like, you're trapped in this victim's point of view. Mm-hmm. But we don't see, like, Alex, like, the actual physical point of view of him ever doing anything wrong. It's only when something bad is happening to him. And so that keeps us always kind of going, oh, right, it's awful to be trapped here as a victim. It doesn't matter if you're the innocent victim or if you're Alex going through the treatment or what have you. But it's something that he, I just think, nailed more than anyone across his career, was taking us on these journeys with really flawed people, to say the least, and making us kind of go, yeah, but I get it. I see myself in their flaws, and less so Alex than other characters, but like, I kind of can see how there's just that human, that human desire to raise up through the ranks like Barry Lyndon, or just follow, some crazy rabbit hole like Eyes Wide Shut, and just kind of that curiosity and desire to like get what you want, and he doesn't ever shy away from that and give these sort of false redeeming qualities to people. He just lets you be with them and see them and kind of laugh at them, but also go, yeah, but there's a little bit of me in there too, you know, as much as I don't want to admit it. And I think that endears you to them.
Yeah, and again, it comes down to casting, right? Like, there's a reason Arlie Ermy is the person you remember most vividly in Full Metal Jacket, even though he's only in the first hour. There's a reason that Sidney Pollack pops in Eyes Wide Shut, I think, just because he's so reasonable, despite the things he's saying and that contradiction of, oh, this man is a nice uncle and a doctor I've known forever. Like, why is he telling me that and expecting me to stay in the room with him? And why am I staying in the room with him? And yeah, I mean, even Nicholson in The Shining, I know Stephen King has problems with him being too big, but I think that's the thing that King missed about his own book, is that Jack Torrance was not a good person. He's trying to pretend he is. And with Nicholson, the mask isn't there. Like, he's a selfish man doing all of this for his family with the excuse that it'll be good for them, but he doesn't really care. Like, he just wants to write his book, and the moment he's given something else that's easier, he takes it. And
right.
It's just vanity, and it's an excellent portrait of vanity. And King, you know, King's not sympathetic to Jack in the book either. It opens with him like swallowing rage in his job interview. The first sentence of the book is Jack Torrance thought a vicious little prick. Like, he doesn't like people. And then because ultimately he realized it was about his own alcoholism, he turned around and, well, I don't think Kubrick got the message that I was trying to convey, and made his own version, which just doesn't work for so many different reasons. But Kubrick sees, like he's opening up a specimen case. He sees right into these characters and finds the actor that should play them. And that's how you get Ermy, and that's how you get Pollock, and that's how you get Nicholson, and especially how you get McDowell, who 50 years later continues to have the best stories about. I will tell that story because I think we have enough time, and I won't do the whole version. But there was a day, a few months into the shoot, because it stretched on longer than they thought it would, where a couple of Warner executives flew out with their assistants in tow and everything from Los Angeles to visit the set, and Kubrick orchestrated it so that they had to take the morning flight from Los Angeles to get there because of the time difference. And so they were in transit all day. They were punchy when they landed. They didn't get to his house, which is where he said they should meet him, because by the time they arrived, the shoot would be done for the day, and he'd show them some footage in his edit suite. And so they get there, they're exhausted, they haven't eaten properly, and Kubrick immediately sees him and goes, "Oh my God, no, we should go to dinner. Let's go. Malcolm, shall we go? We'll go to the Chinese place." And the Chinese place was in London, so it was a 45-minute drive, and they had to go. They had landed at Heathrow, gone to their hotel in London, checked in, dropped their stuff off, come out to him. He had them drive back into London to go to his quote-unquote favorite Chinese restaurant, which was basically just a good Chinese restaurant that he liked. And so he and McDowell took them out to dinner, and they spent 2 or 3 hours there and just made sure they were absolutely wiped, exhausted. It's now midnight or so, UK time. These poor bastards have been up forever. And he says, "You're not going to come back out to the house to see the edits. Come on, just take it easy. Go back to your hotel. We'll do something tomorrow." And the next day, well, shooting ran long. And the day after that, well, shooting ran long. And eventually I think they got to visit the set, but it was one of the most mundane scenes. It was just a dialogue scene in somebody's office. I don't remember which one. And then after 3 days, well, it's the weekend. You guys should just go home. There's really no point staying 2 more days. And they left, and they never saw a single frame of the film.
Wow.
And
oh, that's incredible.
It's just the way McDowell tells it. Kubrick was glad-handing them and charming and funny and lively and absolutely inflexible. He just never let them get to the question of, can we see some film? It just kept not happening. And honestly, I have modeled my entire life on that.
No, that's a great piece of advice. I mean, it's the ask forgiveness, not permission. And as soon as they, got to see some things in this movie, I imagine there would have been hell to pay. Yeah, he always had Final Cut, so that wouldn't have been a problem. But I think they would have maybe started pulling back budget for things. Right.
and just
Totally.
made it impossible to make the movie the way he wanted to. It speaks to so much about him too, like his need for control, but also his understanding of the system and the mechanisms that he had to work in order to get that control and keep it. I there can never be enough documentaries and books written about that man. He is just absolutely fascinating to me. And
No, absolutely.
this might, I don't think it, I mean, I think 2001 is one of the greatest films ever made, full stop, but I keep coming back to Clockwork Orange and thinking maybe it's better. Maybe it's just because ultimately it is about a human being, and 2001 is more of a mission statement on our place in the universe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree. I mean, like I love 2001, and sometimes making lists, I'd call it my favorite movie. But at the same time, it is so it's so lacking in so many things that I think are important for a movie to have. It's just like it couldn't exist in any other form, and the way that A Clockwork Orange is, it couldn't exist in any other form either. Even though it comes from a book, or I guess they both have a book companion, but there's just nothing like the impact of these shots, like you said, these single point perspective framed up shots that are so controlled and yet so full of things that make us feel out of control. Like there really is nothing else like it. And I guess that's kind of why I do think of it as sort of like his most movie, like where he was like, this is what I can do. Like, this is how far I can push it. These are the themes that interest me. Every one of his movies is a man caught in a machine in one way or another is sort of what they are. And then this is literally like kind of trying to make the man into a machine, And it's sort of like, I think it's a great, I don't know, decoder ring or something for his other work too, where you can kind of see the humor in something like Eyes Wide Shut a little more because of a movie like this that so shouldn't be funny, but is and goes for it without abandon.
Yeah, and of course the point of Clockwork Orange is that the laugh should choke you, that you should stop. The only other film I've seen that's had that kind of impact is Man Bites Dog, the Belgian film, which if you've seen the movie, you know the moment where it just basically says, no, you shouldn't, this isn't funny. And you're just hung out there. And Clockwork Orange does that about 4 times an hour. And it's just this constant reminder. It's like, we're not having a good time here. This is suffering. This is what suffering looks like. It just happens to be really beautiful from shot to shot. And then you realize what's going on in the frame and you're confronted with it all over again.
Absolutely.
Awkward segue, I suppose, because I've been trying, we were talking about this before we started recording, I've been trying to figure out if there's a direct connection in Succubus or your own work to Clockwork Orange, and the mechanisms are so different, and the nature of them doesn't overlap, I would say, with Kubrick. But is there something from A Clockwork Orange that you've leaned on or borrowed or used in your own work?
Well, I think the connection for me between the two has to do with, I think, centering on a flawed character, and then using some elements of, at times, satire. I leaned away from it some from the script in Succubus, but the basic I was trying to think of a movie where I saw some sort of parallel, and there'd be more obvious ones like Videodrome or something like that, which kind of has shots we took from and themes related to that. But it's not a movie I love. It's a movie I respect the craft, and I think it's interesting. But the real thing that for Videodrome didn't feel right was like James Woods is sort of such a sleazebag. There's sort of not much redeeming about him in that movie. And what we were trying to do in Succubus was create a flawed protagonist who you still kind of can care for and kind of go, you don't really deserve this. Like you made some mistakes. Like there's a little bit of you made your bed, now lie in it in the movie, but not to this. I mean, this is such an extreme way that it goes. And so that also made me think a little bit about Alex, and just, we're forced to kind of side with Alex in A Clockwork Orange and go with him on this crazy journey. Now, obviously, our protagonist isn't an evil monster like he is, but just a little bit of that sense of we're gonna go on this crazy journey with a flawed protagonist, but we're gonna root for them despite the mistakes they make constantly along the way, and also that there's a little bit of a maybe it's a little bit of a parable, at least for me, and I think like Clockwork Orange is, kind of like a perfect parable where it's like it feels like a Greek myth or something where as soon as he meets all the same people in reverse order from when he left them on the way back, sort of the upside down world kind of situation. And so I kind of like that just that sense like you don't have to believe it as realism for it to be good. It's not about it being about realistic. It's about what does it say and what does it make you feel and how do you engage with what's happening on its own terms. So yeah, kind of distant connection, but I sort of felt like a little bit of a reflection there.
Yeah, and I did notice the one thing I would maybe bring up is the clinical nature of Clockwork's cinematography is sort of mirrored, because Succubus flirts with found footage or screen life, however you want to call it, by showing us cameras on devices, cameras on phones, computers, and the connections that people make are mediated in a way that distances us just the tiniest bit. And then eventually the film has to go somewhere that devices can't go and turns into something else. But I was wondering if you're trying to present the characters that we see as maybe not archetypes, but subjects for study in a larger problem. At least by introducing us, to Perlman's character first and having him be an academic. Maybe this does feel like some sort of runaway thesis paper.
No, I mean there definitely is an element of that all of the archetypes. Kind of, I guess that's kind of what I was going for in the parable analogy. Each what I kind of wanted was each character definitely does. Like Eddie very much represents the sort of bro and the chauvinist, but you see like maybe there's a little something else under there, or it's a little bit of a front, even though we don't lean too hard on that, to sort of have these very kind of archetypes, the wife who's like kind of nice and a little clueless, doesn't really know what's going on with the husband, all these kind of things that then turn a little bit and try and have a little more three-dimensionality to them. But it really is, it's a movie that we do have a lot of distance from them. I mean, there's distance through the screens, so it's become sort of voyeuristic without, even as it's a little bit intimate, because it's private. But as the movie progressed too, it became a very symmetrically shot movie, which we weren't really expecting. And one of the things we talked about too a lot was, so much of it's like this. It's you're directly facing the screen, and so when we were shooting it then in cinematic style as opposed to being on devices, we would question the DP and I, Jimmy, like, well, should we do something different? Should we shoot people in profiles? Should we be doing it, 3/4 so it's not all people looking directly into the lens? And it just felt wrong, over the course of it. Felt like that's what it needs to be, is this kind of symmetrical direct address kind of thing all the way through. And there's something about Alex and the way he's presented, and the way Kubrick always presents characters too, which very much leans into that of like, we're going to look at you. We're not going to look, off to the side, and your eye line's not going to be over here. We're going to look right into your eyes, whether you want to or not. Yeah. And so it's like these things that, we never set out to be like, oh, it should feel Kubrickian or anything like that. But a little bit of it was it started happening organically and felt like it was in there. And, working with fewer takes and lower budget, obviously, but there was something clinical in that approach that felt right, and wasn't necessarily what I thought in the very beginning that it would be. So it's kind of interesting the way the movie tells you what it wants to be.
My thanks to Daniel Hanna, whose very clever thriller Succubus comes to DVD and digital from Shout Studios next Tuesday, September 24th. Thanks also to Karen Oberman. She knows what she did. Daniel's not on social media, but you can keep track of his movie at shoutstudios.com, and you can find A Clockwork Orange on 4K and Blu-ray from Warner Home Entertainment in an excellent special edition. It's also streaming on Hollywood Suite in Canada and available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get the new booster when you can. I'll see you next week.